We are 6 games into the Seahawks season, 3-3, still tied for first, but a lot of question marks early on in this new Mike Macdonald era here. And we're going to get into all of that coming up with Dayna O'Gorman, a returning guest on the show. Dayna is a member of Our Turf Football and also a member of the Pro Football Writers Association. We love having Dayna on. She's going to join us in a bit here. Bryce, also a trade in the works here. Seattle beefing up their defensive line a little bit, man. What are your thoughts? Getting pumped for the show here.
Honestly, I find the trade kind of interesting. They used a late round pick to acquire Roy Robertson Harris from the Jaguars. It's interesting. I think it speaks more to the lack of depth and rotational flexibility in that defensive line room right now. And I think they go out and get a guy that's got 2 years left on his deal with a minimal cap hit, not minimal, but below $10 million a year. So I think he's the guy that's going to come in and play a certain role for Seattle's defensive line that maybe they have had guys that have been underperforming in that role. Draymond Jones as one of those guys. And we'll see how it kind of all plays out. I don't know how much work he'll get in this first Atlanta game, but it'll be an interesting kind of situation looking ahead.
Yeah, we and also talking about looking ahead, we're also going to look ahead to the matchup coming up Sunday against the Falcons in Atlanta, and this is going to be an interesting stretch coming up for the Seahawks because they got sort of this mini bye week happening. So as much scrutiny that they've been under, they did play those 3 games in 10 days and a lot of football. So we're really going to kind of see these next few games how this team is starting to shape up, and maybe a little more questions might be answered as far as how this roster might be turning over, or maybe there's just going to be some little tweaks and all that. John Schneider, we're going to get into all of this on the Hawk Zone with Dayna. But guys, real quick before we get into any of that stuff, if you like what you've been watching on the channel, go down, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, notification button, so you know when future episodes are coming up. And guys, share the video if you can. Helps out the channel and everybody that's been following and subbing and just supporting the channel. We can't say enough. So thank you for that. So on the other side, on the Hawk Zone rundown, Dayna O'Gorman.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. And it's run. What a run. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got a lead. Leo Wilson to catch. Geno Smith and Jimbo. The Seahawks are going to host the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does.
Is it going to be another 9-8?
Mike Macdonald got to finish something.
They have to fix the offensive
Part of his
line.
success and part of
Ambition of being the LOB
Want to hear? That's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the Hawk Zone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
Dayna O'Gorman joins us back in the show, member of our Turf Football and a member of the Pro Football Writers Association. Dayna, we appreciate you coming back on the show again and chopping up Seahawks with us tonight.
Oh, I love coming on the show. I get so excited when you guys invite me because I know it's just a great conversation, and you guys have such a good take on this stuff. I love it. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh yeah, we appreciate the kind words. So yeah, let's get into it. Look, we've played 6 games, 3-3, obviously getting off to that 3-0 start. Everybody feeling good. Even though we know we played, a rookie quarterback and then a backup quarterback, but we're just like, hey, this is Mike Macdonald's first 3 games. Like NFL football teams are NFL football teams. A win in the NFL is a big deal. We get off to a 3-0 start, then we start thinking, okay, here's the next step. The Monday Nighter in Detroit, and then the Giants. Well, we should handle them. There was some things you took away from the Detroit game that you're like, okay, some positives. Then the last 2 were pretty messy, right? And then you look at the team overall and you say, okay, we're at the 6-game mark, and a lot of people say at this point of the season you should sort of know who you are.
Yep.
At this point, after 6, getting your take on this, who is this team after 6 games? Do we have an identity? What are your thoughts on that?
That is very simple answer to that is absolutely not. The interesting thing that you that has been brought up a lot lately really since Thursday, right? About who are the Seattle Seahawks. We always knew who they were for the last, so many years. And even if they didn't perform well, we knew who they were trying to be, right? And I think with the first 3 games, I would say there's a new coach bump, right? New coach bump. People don't know what you're going to throw at them. It's kind of new. It's a new season. And I agree with you guys completely. You have no idea who a team is until weeks 4 to 6. Like, it's just all jumbled at the beginning. And so who you play at the beginning really is important, because stacking those wins at the beginning before teams kind of settle in is really important, right? And that's exactly what Seattle did. Seattle went in, they stacked 3 wins in a row. They beat Denver as they should have. They, beat the Patriots as they should have. That took a little more effort than I would have liked to have seen out of this team, but they did it, right? And that was important. Then you went in and got really lucky that Tua was out and they beat Miami. I don't think they would have won that game had Tua been in, but we don't know. And we did. Stack the win. Take it, right? It sucks for Miami. It was a good break for Seattle. And then you went into the Lions. Now, I am someone who picked the Lions to go to the Super Bowl. So I had no hope. I had no dreams that Seattle would beat this team, even though the Lions had been a little shaky in a couple of games. But again, beginning of the season. They lost that game, but played well. And I was like, okay, that is all I wanted, right? That offense looked amazing in that game. And then the Giants showed up. And I have no idea what the heck happened in that game. It is baffling to me. I still just watch it in complete disbelief. And then to turn around and have to play the Niners, who I had, again, no true feeling that we would win that game. I think I had them losing both Niner games, even with the injuries, even with, because injuries kind of even out throughout the season for every team, right? Unless it's one major one like Tua in Miami. So I think being 3-3 is about where I thought this team would be. I thought they would probably be 4-2 is what I had them at the beginning of the season, thinking that they would beat that Giants team. So the record itself does not bother me so much. It's the complete falling off the cliff in the last 2 games, and really only 2. That Lions game, I thought they played well. I mean, the defense really could have done better, but it's the Lions. And so I expected it. Yeah. But I just have been so frustrated. So when you look at that, I had an idea who I thought Seattle was going to be after 3 games, even after 4. But they've completely lost the plot in the last 2 games. And I don't know. I don't know how they recover from that quickly. Now, I will say, if you go back and watch individual performances in that Niner game, there were some that weren't as bad as we thought they were. Really, when you go and look at the tape, it's really not so bad. It's not great, but it's not quite the disaster. And you see the plays and you see, how well the Niners played against what they were given. But it's still a loss. And now going into a Falcons game, which I know we're going to talk about later, I have no idea what team is going to show up on the field.
So Dayna, I've got a question for you in regards to this. You said you didn't have a problem with them being 3-3.
Right.
I got posed a question on a show earlier this weekend from a listener, and they said, how would you feel if the 3 wins were flopped? So if they had won their 3 that they've lost and lost the 3 games that they won, would you feel different about this team and the way they're going if they had beat the Niners, beat the Lions, beat the Giants, but lost to the Dolphins, the Broncos, and the Patriots? And it was really a tough question for me because
that's a great question.
I was like kind of sitting there and I was like, they're 3-3 either way, but I'd probably feel better if they beat a Lions team and the Giants team. And they're like, all the same issues are relevant and they're all there, but your wins are swapped with your losses. And I was like, I don't know how to give you a solid answer and how I'd feel about that. So I pose the same question to you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would feel like 100% better about this team. And the reason being is early season jitters, new coach, new coordinators, all that, just settling in. It would have killed me to my core to lose to Sean Payton because I hate that man. But I would have been like, okay, beginning of the season, we're just starting to get rolling a little bit. All right, that's okay. Oh, look, because what they would have done is they would have beaten the better teams, not just the teams they should have, right? And I'm not saying the Giants are a better team in any way, but they would have beaten. And everyone, I saw it all over before the Thursday night game. If they beat the 49ers, all is forgiven. All is forgiven if they beat the Niners. And I think that what that would have been for me would have just been because they would have risen to the challenge that was given them in playing these better teams. And so I would definitely feel better, although it's still worrisome, right? Because what it really comes down to more than anything is that are these super complicated schemes that everyone keeps talking about, that everyone says Macdonald brings to the defense and Grubb brings to the offense, and the super complicated stuff, are they fitting their players that they have in front of them? Are they implementing them fast enough? Are they, and if they had won the last 3 games, I would say, okay, they're starting to get it. Yeah, it's starting to roll a little bit if it had taken longer at the beginning. But now I think that's still a huge question mark.
Yeah, we come in. A lot of people were coming into this season with higher hopes. Like it was like, okay, when we first got hired, it was like, well, let's just wait and see. Let's just see how this team responds. And after sort of, you see some of the free agents that were coming in, like you had some higher hopes in the draft, and then just the way Mike was carrying himself, and the way camp was going, and all the positives you heard, and preseason going pretty well for him. And then all of a sudden, people were like, you know what? A lot of people you talk to were having this team in a double digit win column. Really quickly, that has changed. Like really quickly, we're talking about, can this team even get to what we did last season? Because you look at the schedule and you look at the stretch we have, it is just really no, quote unquote easy games. Like I said, in the NFL, I don't really believe in that, but there's favorable games. So when you look at Mike Macdonald, and I know it's only 6 games, there's people that will come out on certain podcasts and just be like, you know what, this guy needs 2 years. Like it's almost like a freebie year for him in a way. When you look at it though, like you expect the basics to kind of get taken care of. Like when the Niners didn't have CMC, you brought up injuries. They had a lot of significant injuries. Ward not there on the corner, like he usually goes against DK. Not having CMC, we talked about like how Brock Purdy, CMC makes that offense run. But all of a sudden, it's business as usual against our run defense, giving up over 200 plus yards. And then the big one at the end when you're just like, hey, if we can get a stop, we still have a chance. But all that was shattered off of a fifth string running back in a 76-yard run or something stupid. Then they cap it off with a touchdown. They're jumping into the crowd. It's embarrassing, right?
Right.
So how much responsibility does Mike have to take early on, even if it's not maybe the perfect personnel that he has in the building right now? And so how much is it on him right now? And will he get further under a microscope? Like in the next 3 games, for example, we go 0-3. I don't want to jump ahead too far.
Sure.
But if we're playing the way we are playing on defense, and then obviously the offensive line we'll talk about later, but just the issues that we have in this team, if we fall to like 4 and 3 and 6, or just things are really falling off the rails, are more people going to sort of start looking at Mike and be like, wait a second, you were supposed to be this guru, and we don't expect all cylinders firing, but we expect some type of just better than last season. That was why we got like Pete's out the door. We can't get rid of that. Bring in a defensive guy. And these last 2 games, it hasn't looked better.
So that is a super layered question. And the reason that it's so layered is because there's so many ifs and buts and maybes and all of that. And so literally it's impossible to predict anything by the end of the season right now, right? Football is a living, breathing organism and it just changes constantly. But I will say this. I was one of the few people who was not through the roof, over the moon about the hiring of Mike Macdonald. I liked him. My preference would have been Dan Quinn, but that is for a million different reasons. But I know a lot of people didn't want that retread. I get that. They wanted brand new. They wanted young, right? Okay. So you got what you wanted. And I wasn't against Mike Macdonald. He just wasn't my first choice. And I just couldn't get as hyped up as everyone else could, mostly because I kept saying, he's worked under the Harbaughs, right? And the Harbaughs, they're real, right? Those are coaches. They run their teams and they are fabulous teachers. And I respect that family. Even though I call Jim Harbaugh evil Harbaugh, I still respect that family like crazy. But I didn't think that we should expect so much from Mike Macdonald right off the bat by himself when he's been under this fantastic umbrella. But then he hired Grubb and the expectation went through the roof with Seattle people because University of Washington, they went to this, national championship and he's the best thing that's ever walked on the planet. Okay. So first time head coach, first time offensive coordinator. Okay. Well, now we're going to bring in Leslie Frazier. Okay. I really felt like that was a pat on the head to me. You're fine, Dayna, sort of thing. But then they bring in Aiden Dirty, who I actually really like. Aiden Dirty, I really enjoy him. But again, first timer. So I was like, okay, everyone needs to kind of slow their roll a little bit. These are all I call rookie football players babies. The babies are out, and this is a baby coaching staff, right? And so we have to hold our expectations. And I think people did pretty well with that during camp. They were like, okay, but it's going to take some time. It's going to do this, it's going to do that. And then they went 3-0, and I think people just lost their minds. I think the expectations went through the roof. He was the second coming of Sean McVay. Yeah. He could do nothing wrong. Everything was great. Well, unfortunately, the fall from that pedestal is going to be just as harsh. But the truth truly lies somewhere in the middle. When you look at what is going on with this team, like I already mentioned, you have a super complicated defense coming in from a super complicated offense on there also that takes time to learn. Plus, you have players that are used to the previous coach. I don't know. Are you allowed to say Pete Carroll in this podcast? Because I've been on a bunch of, you're not allowed to say those words. So,
yeah, you can say Pete Carroll.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
So they're used to Pete Carroll, right? And so they're used to simpler things and basic things and the same thing over and over again. It's going to take a little time to get in. It's not his personnel, right? John Schneider, brought in these guys. Okay. So we don't necessarily might have the guys that fit the scheme. So do we need to adjust the scheme? It's so layered and so complicated, and it will take time. I am a big fan of giving a coach a minute, right? I really am, especially a rookie head coach. Let him settle in. But what you need to see over your 2 years or your 3 years or whatever these people are saying, you need to see progress. You need to see that they're getting better. You need to see the players are getting it. You need to see that the scheme is starting to move forward, that you're getting more competitive. What we've seen in the last 3, really only 2. I have no problem with the Lions game. I'm totally okay with how that went. But I wish we would have won it, but I didn't think we would. But the last 2 games, you didn't see that we got any closer to the Niners. You didn't see that we even could play down to a team, right? And yes, there were injuries in that Giants game. And yes, every team has them. And it's just the way it is. But I think what we need to see is progress. So we lose the next 3. That's not progress. That's a mess. He wins 2 of the 3. Okay, we're starting to pick it up again. So really, it's going to be that balancing out throughout the rest of this season. And then next off season, how the shuffling of the players and what happens then. Then you get into year 2. That's when your full forward progress has to begin, in my opinion, through that season to really decide, is this the coach and the coaching staff that you want? So I hate to say, yes, it might be a 2-year process, but it's a 2-year process with progress.
So it's really funny that you went there, Dayna, because I'm kind of the idea that this is going to take 2 years. This is going to take the same amount of time it took Pete Carroll when he took over from Mike Holmgren and Jim Moore. If we look at the 2010 season, the year that they went 7-9 and made the playoffs with Matt Hasselbeck and that whole roster, that they did turn over a lot of players, but there wasn't a lot of players that fit Pete's scheme yet and Pete's style of playing. And they were an up and down team. Even the last, month of the season, they went on a 3-game losing streak until they won that final game to get into the playoffs. A little bit different than what Mike's dealing with right now. But I feel this is a more of an indictment in a lot of ways on John Schneider and how he's constructed this roster and the personnel that they've brought in. And now that Pete's gone, he's got to wear that hat that, like, hey, you were a part of that initial group and that part of the organization that brought in this roster. Because if you look at the additions they made, you got the draft class, and you could see a very, I could say, drastic difference in the way they went after players a little bit this year in the draft compared to previous years. They addressed things earlier that they normally didn't. And then you could see it in free agency a little bit too. Like they went out and got the 2 linebackers, very different than what they've had before with Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks. The 2 linebackers that they brought in, they waited a long time. They did a little bit differently. Hasn't really panned out the best way. I'm a big fan of Tyrese Knight. I think he's actually going to be good. I just think he needs to develop a little bit more. But the thing for me is I've seen so many people be like, okay, this has failed already. You went from a very simplistic scheme on both sides of the ball. Like Shane Waldron did not run an overly sophisticated offense. I'm sorry, he didn't.
No.
And so you bring in Grubb, and me and Ryan talked about this on our last show. You bring in Grubb, and everyone thought it was going to be carbon copy from Washington because, well, JSN's like, Jalen McMillan, and Dunze's like DK, and you have all these pieces. It was like, there's one big caveat that's not the same. Offensive line. You went from the best offensive line in college football for the last 2 years, roughly, for Grubb, to one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. Like, we really have had the worst offensive line in a lot of ways. And that's, I think, a big sore spot for me with John Schneider right now is the neglect of either the scouting department to actually properly evaluate and draft linemen, or your pro scouting department in acquiring offensive linemen. Because, okay, great, you went and drafted 2 young tackles in Cross and Lucas, but then do what a lot of other teams do and fortify the interior of it with veteran players. You missed on Creed Humphrey and took D. Eskridge. Like, there's just been so many instances where John Schneider, in my opinion, has drastically failed at evaluating the trenches on both sides in a lot of ways. Because I look back to our 2013 Super Bowl team. None of those guys on that offensive line or defensive line were drafted. Michael Bennett was an acquisition that we let go and then got back. Cliff Averill, Chris Clemens was a trade. Red Bryant had been there from the previous regime. Mebane was drafted by Holmgren. No one in that group was a John Schneider, Pete Carroll draft pick or along those lines that you were able to say, hey, yeah, they can hang their hat on that. And so that's where, for me, I look at this and I go, let's give Mike a year. Let's see some progress like we did towards the end of the 2011 with the LOB, like Sherm started to play, Cam started to play, and you start to see that progress. If you don't see that, then I think there's going to be a drastic change with, you're going to still keep Mike, but there may be changes elsewhere within this coaching staff of things we have to change. I just don't think you can throw the entirety of the problem. And some people have said this on their shows where he has to wear the blame. He's making, like Ryan said, $9 million a year. Yes, I agree with that. But as a coach myself, it's a lot easier to look at that from the outside than actually be dealing with that problem on the inside when you don't have pieces that fit what you do well. And trying to flip what you do to fit those pieces is a lot harder than people think.
It is a lot harder. And yet, to be on the flip side of that, that's his job. The thing of it is he's brand new to his job. So he might take a minute to figure out how he's supposed to do that, right? That's going to take a little bit of time. I'm not going to give Mike, just give him a pass, because when you become a head coach, you are the head coach. At the same time, I think that he needs to understand, and this is something Pete wasn't great at. And as much as I love Pete Carroll, he wasn't great at, he needs to learn to adapt to what he's got in front of him right now. This game, that's all we need to talk about right now, this next game, right? And so that's going to take some time. Here's the interesting thing. These are such polar opposite coaches, where you had a head coach in the building for years who, even when it was the worst of the worst, would go in and tell their players they were the best and tell them they were fantastic, pump them up, keep the energy high, keep them going. From what I've been told by people who are on the inside, that is not who Mike Macdonald is. He is not a rah-rah guy. He is not going to be the guy that gives the pep talk. He's not going to be the guy that goes in and says, well, you did all of this right, but you did all of this wrong, and so let's focus on the right. No, that's not. He's super analytical. He's very dry. I think that that's just not his personality. And that's okay, because people like that make great football coaches too. You can have both, right? But then you got to find the guy who can do that. I don't know if that's Aiden Dirty. I don't know if that's Leslie Frazier. I don't know
Yeah.
who it is, but someone else has to come in and pick up that slack for him. When you look at John Schneider, I think everything in the next couple of years is in his lap. He handpicked this head coach. He helped pick. He didn't. Now, Mike Macdonald picked his own staff, but I'm sure Schneider had a conversation about every single one of them with him. And I think that he is the one, if anyone in the building's seat should be hot, it would probably be his in the next 1 to 2 years. I'm not saying now. I'm not saying this season. I'm not saying anything. But in the next 1 to 2 years, because if you can see progress and you can see the planning and you can see that it's starting to work, what Macdonald wants to do, but the players he needs aren't getting there, then you got to look about where the players are coming from. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that if anyone's seat is going to be hot, it's going to be his probably in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I like what you just said about right now. Like that's the thing. It's a balancing act between like no one, like I said, no one expects him to have everything fired on all cylinders.
No.
But at the same time, you're making an extraordinarily a large amount of money. You are the head coach, and you have to. This season's not a wash. It's not like let's just not worry about it and get to year 2 when you can get your own personnel. It's a balance. Now, do we expect them to be better in 2025 and 2026? We hope so. That's the point. It's supposed to be where's this trajectory? Just the same as how are we looking in November, December? And that's what we talked about in the offseason a lot. How is this team looking late November into December? Not wins and losses, just like you said, 3-3, throw that record out the window. How did the last 2 games look, right? And that's what, like, if you see that in December, that's not a good thing, because personnel aside, you can clean house. That doesn't mean now, like, I'm going to base some of that off how we finished off the year. It's just like a lot of things. Now you're going to change up your personnel, but so that's how I look at it right now too. But it is a balancing act, because I do think you still have a job with the personnel you have. Now, how are you going to adapt to it? Like, how are you going to maybe make things a little more basic and whatever you need to do? And fans have that expectation. I don't think anyone thinks we're going to the Super Bowl. And even after 3-0, I think there was higher expectations. Like, hey, we can make the playoffs and make it maybe a little run. Now it might be like, okay, if we play well, maybe we could squeeze a wild card. But the point is that it's just, how is this team gonna look? And I agree with Schneider. I think when you look at it, and I think it's the same with any head coach that's won a Super Bowl, that leash becomes really long. Like we just Bryce talked about just a few minutes ago, all the guys that Schneider signed 10 or 11 years ago.
Right.
Because that in the back of our mind, that Super Bowl didn't feel like that. That felt like yesterday. And so when you win a bowl, when you win a Super Bowl, your leash becomes long, whether you're the GM, whether you're the coach. John Schneider constructed a very amazing roster.
Right.
Now, with you could say some of that was luck in the draft, whatever. He put that together, and he brought us to back-to-back, and that team went to back-to-back Super Bowls and one of the best defenses of all time. So it's hard when you look at him and say, man, is he on a hot seat? Whoa,
Right.
you wouldn't really think of that. Like, it was Pete. And then, we took care of that. We brought in Mike. Well, that's problem solved. Now we start thinking, wait, some of the same things are happening here. Maybe it's this construction of this roster.
Right.
So,
and then that makes you question all the Pete haters out there who are like, all of this was Pete Carroll's fault. Okay, was it? And I'm not, there's guys out there who like, you're a Pete cultist. I'm really not. I was totally okay with Pete leaving, because it was time. It was time for new and different. We had to try something else. I was great. I'm totally okay with that. Have a ton of respect for the man, but still, I was cool with finding a new head coach. But it's never one problem. It's never one person, right? And so it's the core group. And so changing the core group hopefully then brings along that change that you need to make your team better. But it might take a minute. It might.
Yeah, no, for sure. I want to touch on this too real quick. When you look at the offense, you mentioned Mike, not that like raw guy. And he's very analytical, and we both think he's going to do well. Don't get us wrong, but or anybody listening. But you saw a couple things that you didn't see too much, and maybe it was a carryover of things that have been happening. DK and Geno have been around for all these Niners losses, and you saw a lot of sulking, but you saw it on the Giants game too. And I love DK Metcalf. Don't get me wrong. You're hearing a lot more trade talks. I still like the guy. I still think he's a valuable piece and all this kind of stuff. But what's your take from seeing some of that? Is this just frustration boiling over? Like obviously DK, then now the grabbing the headset thing and saying let me talk to Grubb.
Mm-hmm.
You can't deny that he wants to win. I mean, he
100%.
like maybe he's going about it certain ways, but this guy's a competitor through and through, and you can critique his game, this and that. But what was your take on just some of that stuff that's happened that sort of Pete maybe had a little more, like you didn't see that kind of stuff, like
Agreed.
Geno smashing the iPad and DK grabbing the headset, stuff like that, and sulking. Like they're not, like Bryce and I talked about, they weren't talking together on the sideline. Like DK was sitting beside Sam Howell. It wasn't like, hey, things aren't clicking. Let's one wide receiver one talking with quarterback one. Like, what are you seeing? Let's get this right. So what's your take seeing that? Is it just blown out of proportion, or we just under a microscope too much and that'll sort of blow over, or do you think it's a bigger issue, some more underlying issues that we don't really know of?
I don't think it's a big issue, but I think it's an issue. I don't think it's huge, but I do think it's a bit of an issue. And it does have to do with locker room dynamics, right? And what I think that it came from, we've always known who DK is. I love that. I think it's so funny that we accept those types of attitudes from defensive players, but we don't from offensive players. I've never understood that it happens all the time. I mean, remember the complete meltdown Sherman used to have? We didn't ever say a word. It's like, oh, that's Sherm, whatever.
The only difference is I'd say is that they were winning. I mean, it falls under a microscope when you're losing games. Like you're 5-1 or 6-0 and you grab a headset. It's like, wow, whatever.
Yeah,
that's DK being DK.
Right. No, you are absolutely right. But I do think that I think what is happening with fans, where as disappointed and confused as we are, think of how that would feel as a player. So you buy into this, you buy into the 3-0, you buy in to the new. You've been told by everyone that you had to get rid of this man who was a mentor to you because we needed to fix this. And okay, he's going to come in and fix it. And now we're excited because, we're going to get behind it and now we're 3-0. And then things start to fall apart. I don't know if it will be a long-term issue or if it's just crap, it was the Niners again, and we're at home and we're not doing well. And we lost to the stupid Giants. I mean, come on, right? It's the same reactions we have. And so I don't know that it will last long-term. I think that Geno will snap out of, I think there's some Geno in the back of his head really thought this was his year to really up some money for him too, which he deserved. And he was playing so well. And he's still playing pretty well. Let's not get too down on Geno. I'm a huge Geno Smith fan, so I don't want to get down on Geno or DK, but there's something amiss there. That's Ryan Grubb's job. Now, I don't know it. I've never been a college football coach. I've never been an NFL coach. So I'm assuming the personalities are a little different when you have college kids to, these professionals making millions and millions of dollars, although I guess college kids do now too, but at the same time, but you know what I mean? So I'm assuming that it's going to take a little time for him to figure out how to manage those personalities too. But what it's going to come down to is the question mark truly is leadership in that locker room. Where are the leaders? Who are the leaders? I think Geno was considered a leader, but he's so laid back, right? And it's the same with Tyler. I'm like, Tyler could be like a leader that maybe is just more quiet. We need the screaming leaders. We need I'm not trying to compare the teams, but we need the Bobby Wagners to come in there, knock some heads together. They need that stand up. And I know that they're there. I think that Williams is one of them. I think that some of these guys could be the guy. I just don't know if they've done it yet. So hopefully they'll have a little come to Jesus here this weekend and get some things right. And we'll find that leadership, because that is not who DK is. And I'm okay with that. DK doesn't have to be a leader. He wants to be a star, and that's okay. Deion Sanders was never a leader, right? He was the star. And so you have those players. Probably a bunch of people on here don't even know who Deion Sanders is other than the head coach of Colorado. But it's like, it was kind of an old reference. But at the same time, I think that that's what I mean. We don't expect that from DK, but he needs to quit being so visible, maybe, with his disappointment.
Yeah, it's funny because I look at two things here, Dan, and the two players, and there's been a lot of talk lately about contract extensions for both of them. Like, how's that going to look in the off season, and and how are you going to allocate this money? And I'll start with the Geno side of it for me. I love Geno. I think I got a Geno Smith jersey. I think Geno and what he's done with his career has been great. I don't look at Geno, though, and see the guy that's going to necessarily get us over the hump. I think Geno's the right quarterback for where the Hawks are right now. And the reason I say that is because I was having this conversation with Dan Viens, and we were going back and forth on it. I've had it with some other people. Obviously, Seahawks Twitter at the night after the game was going nuts and get rid of everybody and whatnot. But what it showed me is me and Dan were going back and forth. We were texting, and I said, what is Geno's signature win against a non-bottomish team? What is his signature win since he has been the starter of the Seahawks? And me and Dan went back and forth, and we're like, well, Detroit. And we're like, well, Detroit really wasn't at the times when it happened because it was the beginning of the year. There wasn't anything really on the line. It wasn't a division rival. We kind of maybe said maybe it's the Rams game a few years ago, but the Rams weren't very good when he did it. They weren't the Rams that we knew. They were in that lull year that they had. And he's never beaten the Niners. And it's like, for the guy to be that guy and want the money he's trying to get to, which I think in some respects he does deserve because of his play in certain aspects, he's never been able to get that win. He doesn't have that signature win you look for in that type of quarterback where you go, yeah, that's our guy. But the team constructed currently right now, I don't think is capable of handling a young franchise quarterback. I don't want a Bryce Young situation like Carolina where you bring him in and he gets completely shell-shocked because there's nothing around him. And when you look back to when Seattle did eventually get Russ, yes, they got him in the third round because he was 5'11". The team was there. The defense had been assembled. The run game was there. There were all the pieces. It was plug in, don't turn over the football, and just play decent football and we'll be okay. And then Russ slowly, we realized what Russ really was. That's my take with Geno now is I love Geno. I think he's good for what we are. He's not the guy to get you over the top. And I don't know if you can allocate the amount of money that you see like Trevor Lawrence them getting because they sent the market through the roof. Tua and Trevor. Thank you so much for that.
Right.
But then when I flipped to DK, and I had this conversation as well, me and Ryan have had it. If you trade DK in the offseason, which Mike Salk from 710 keeps pumping those over and over and over again, and I can't listen to that guy anymore about it because it just makes nonsense to me. But if you were to trade DK, there's a good chance Tyler's not on this team next year because Tyler could very well retire. The way that they've set up his contract,
I expect him to.
You're left with JSN and Jake Bobo. You went from one, like realistically, and Derek Young, sorry, that's your receiving core. As it's currently constructed, if those two dudes walk out the door, that's what you're left with. And I don't think people like, are you prepared? Like if Geno were to go down the coast like Sherm did and end up in San Francisco and have him in that red jersey, come back here twice a year and turn into some star receiver, not that he's not here, but all of a sudden we figure out, oh, we weren't using him right or whatever the reason. And the thing for me is, and what I've seen from Ryan Grubb, stop trying to make DK into something he's not. They keep trying to throw DK goal line fades. DK is not a goal line fade receiver. He's not. He's never been one. He can't attack the ball the way he should for whatever reason. Use him on slants. Let him be a big dude that he is. Stop trying to make him into a finesse receiver just because it checks some boxes saying he's a complete wide receiver. You didn't do that with Calvin Johnson. They didn't do that with Julio. They played to their strengths. Play to DK's strengths. Use JSN and the other guys for the other things you need in your offense. But I will say my one biggest gripe right now with Grubb, and I think it's my gripe with the Seahawks organization, stop wasting money on the tight end position. That's like my biggest pet peeve right now is that we paid Noah Fant and we're still not using him and we could have used that money somewhere else. Stop wasting money on tight ends. AJ Barner and Farrell Brown, if we had both of them out there and no Noah Fant, you wouldn't notice a difference.
The thing of it is when they paid Noah Fant, I'm like, oh, what are we doing with him?
Yeah.
How is he going to be used in the system? Oh, never mind. It doesn't matter. And to your first point, I really thought that bridge quarterback was what Geno was for. We were going to have him for 2 or 3 years, get every other part of the team set, and then bring in your rookie. It's the most logical, best formula for a winning team. We've seen it happen time and time and time again. Hello, Houston Texans right now. And now the rest of the team is falling apart too. So then you almost have to start over again. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at that, and is it a case where also when you look at John, and we've criticized him a little bit here tonight, but just over whatever the statistic is, over the last 14, 15 seasons, he's drafted 2 QBs. Does he have to just start taking QBs? Like, and you've seen it time and time before. Like, you're like, okay, you don't have to be married to the next guy you pick. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like, just like step up to the podium and announce a quarterback's name. We thought maybe this year they might have taken one later, and then with the Sam Howell trade, then we sort of said, okay, we understand why they didn't. And then obviously picking at 16 this year, it was quarterback heavy, but all those teams needed a QB. So 2 things I'll ask you here, sticking with the offense. Is it time to just go up to the podium and announce a quarterback, whether you have, like, either you trade some capital and say, we need to move up and get one, like finally go do that and go get one. Like, look at, say, we talked about a Jaden Daniels this offseason, and that would have been a stretch. That would have been a stretch to go that high. But like you mentioned, Dan Quinn, and like just bringing in some guy that you take a shot on. Now, some of those guys are going to be busts, right? We know that. We know that the amount of first round quarterbacks are going to be busts. But you go take one. Like Bryce mentions, John Schneider back in the day, the Green Bay method of just drafting guys and pumping out quarterbacks, and they get far. And if another guy doesn't work out, they trade him off to another organization. And then when they hit, a la Aaron Rodgers and now Jordan Love, seems like a pretty good way to do it. We're not doing it. So do we finally start saying, hey, we got to go get one next year? And even if you have Geno for another 2 or whatever, and is it time to stop messing around with this O-line interior and start putting money into it? I know Bryce sort of touched on it, but 2 things that's like before, because we're taking guys like JSN and Ken Walker, we're drafting running backs and we want to run the football, but then you're ignoring the offensive line to a point, right? Especially that interior. I know they got some late round guys, project guys, but just first round talent, signing dudes, paying money. John's mentioned how they're overpaid before. Is it time where it's like, hey, I got to throw all that in a window. I got to maybe start drafting quarterbacks, and I have to, like, it's under a microscope where we have to start really addressing the O-line too.
So, okay. So first about the quarterbacks. The thing with the quarterback this year, I was a little relieved when they traded for one instead of picked one. And that was just because you knew in that first round that they were just going to go like hotcakes, good or bad or not. When Spencer Rattler fell a little bit, I thought maybe, but then, I thought they could still get rid of Halligan, even though they traded for him. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, wait, but then they didn't, and that's fine. I think that I was kind of relieved they didn't this year, to be honest with you, with a new head coach, new coordinators. I think that they didn't want any quarterback drama. They didn't want any of that, oh, Geno had a bad game, so now we're going to start screaming for the backup. You know what I mean? I think that they wanted some consistency there since there were so many new changes. But going forward, especially depending on how the rest of this year pans out, I don't think it's a bad idea. I understand the thought process of not wanting to waste a pick on someone you're not going to use. I get that, right? But there's some examples of those late round quarterbacks, and we all know who they are, that can show up and show out. So it can't hurt, really. If you have faith in your starter, it can't hurt. And it's funny you bring this up because there was, I don't know if it was an article or it was on a show, I can't remember, but just last week, there's been a conversation again coming back up to, do we have to start these kids immediately? Should they sit behind someone for a year? Look what's happening to so many of these kids. And that's when Caleb Williams was still struggling. That's, Bryce Young had just been benched. Like, all of that was going on. It's like, look what it did for Patrick Mahomes, who is really truly the last example of someone who had to sit for a year, other than Love, but he's out for a few years. And look what that did for him. Look what learning from Alex Smith taught Patrick Mahomes. And so it'll be interesting to see if that starts to come back into play. If that does come back into play, absolutely. Get a quarterback, sit him, let him learn, and then hopefully he'll be good enough. And if he's not, like you said, you don't have to keep him unless you take him in the first round. In the first round, I think it's much harder to justify cutting that first round pick. So I think that I could see that being a thing in the future with Schneider, but I don't know about the O-line. He is so adamantly opposed to playing offensive linemen. And now in Brian Nimhauser, Hawk blogger, he just did an article a couple of weeks ago about how decimated O-line is across the league. Like, and you can't find good O-linemen anymore. And colleges aren't pumping out good O-linemen anymore. And how different it is and how difficult it is. So what does that do? That makes them more valuable. So they're going to go higher. You're going to have to jump for an O-lineman now. I don't see John Schneider doing that ever. Right. He has said a million times they're overpaid and, they're over, drafted. Look what's happening to you. Yeah. And so in his head, maybe he thinks that if you get a good enough quarterback, it doesn't matter what your line looks like, but that's just not the real world. So I would see maybe him starting to draft quarterbacks before he starts to move up for linemen. And nobody's trading their linemen anymore because they're just too valuable. And so unless someone goes on free agency and is really looking for a huge payday, it's going to be hard to find a really good vet. And I don't know that he'll pay them. It's very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Should he? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can speak to that O-line stuff a little bit, Dayna. Because I read Brian's article and he's absolutely right. Like the NFL and college is completely lacking in development of offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. Part of that goes actually back farther to amateur football. And so like I coach, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and the amount of them that have never been in a 3-point stance as an offensive lineman, the amount of them that don't understand run blocking and are more comfortable in pass blocking is disturbing, because when I played, linemen love to run block. It's go downhill, it's go hit someone in the mouth. And the amount of kids now that don't know how to do that properly, and then it just progressively gets worse as they get older. And you look at all these teams in college that go to this spread system with the RPO stuff and all this kind of stuff. You don't see anymore. And some of the Big Ten teams still do it. The Big Ten still, I think, the best place to get O-linemen if you're going to get guys, especially interior. But it's just, it's a whole thing across the board. And I think what this is showing is you have to actually pay those free agency. Like, how much would you right now rather have, say you didn't re-sign Noah Fant and it left enough money in the pot to keep Damian Lewis around over Lincoln Tomlinson? Like, Damian Lewis has actually been pretty good. No, but I'm not joking. Damian Lewis has been good in Carolina. Like, he hasn't been.
This Sunday he did not do well. But yes, I get what you're saying. Well,
but overall, in comparison to Lincoln Tomlinson,
fair.
I would rather have Damian Lewis at my left guard spot. And that's the kind of this thing is Lincoln Tomlinson wasn't good last year with New York. And it was like, oh, it's an anomaly. He's durable. He's always on the field. That's great. Just because someone's always available doesn't mean they're the right guy for the job. It's like anything in the world of business. Like, just because someone's always there doesn't mean they do their job well. And that's where, for me, like me and Ryan have been talking, and depending on how this team does over the next 3 going into their actual bye week, if they're still kind of a muddling 500, maybe a bit below, I would rather see Lamea and Haynes out there at a point and see what they can do and start playing our young guys. That's when I will give Pete credit for a huge amount in those initial 3 years in Seattle. Is if the veteran wasn't cutting it, he was putting the young guy in there, he was getting them going, and he was developing. That's the thing with Mike Macdonald. Like the Tyrese Knight thing, I didn't think he was playing all that bad when he was playing for Jerome Baker. And then all of a sudden he's getting like 0 snaps now. And it's like Jerome Baker is this phenomenal linebacker. And I'm watching the game and I'm like, unless I'm seeing something else, Jerome Baker is not playing good football. Why is Tyrese Knight not getting some reps in there occasionally and giving this guy a breather? I hope we don't have one of these situations where it's like Mike Macdonald doesn't want to play a rookie until he's sure, because of what practice says, that guy's good enough.
Yeah, game day reps are all that matter, right? That's the only way you're ever going to be able to evaluate anybody, for sure. Yeah, I think that the interesting thing with all of this is we are going to find out who Mike Macdonald is here in the next few games. If he looks at it, excuse me, if he looks at it and is like, this is just not getting what I need to find out what these other guys have. The analytical brain of his, I could see where he'd be like, you know what? we're losing this game. The last quarter, you're all going in. Let's just see what the hell happens, right? Let's just throw it at the wall and see what sticks, right? So I think that we will learn about him. Sadly, what will happen is you're going to have some people will go, oh, he's given up. He doesn't even want to win anymore. It's like, that's just not how it works. And if people could have wrapped their brains around it from the beginning, that this is not the year, kids. This is not it. We're looking a couple years out, then I think they'd be okay with that. But then they went 3-0 and it just changed everyone's expectations so much. I am optimistic with this coaching staff that they just still need to settle in and figure out some things. I'm really hopeful that these players will get to know what they're expected, what's expected of them better. I think that the personnel, although the talent level on the team right now does seem to be a bit lacking, but then you have these great guys that just kill it, right? You have Ken Walker. Heck, even Charbonnet, when Walker was out, he was playing, you know what I mean? And you have your DK, you have these guys, you have Williamson, Murphy will come back. And, so we need to see that progression and have those guys stand up and become leaders. But I think we're going to learn a lot about the coaching staff truly over the next couple of games.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this 3-game stretch is going to be a big thing, because I think we can critique the personnel, but we looked at this personnel and that was the big thing. Post Russ, we went 9-8 and made the playoffs. And then last year we go 9-8 and missed the playoffs. But like you said, it wasn't a great 9 wins, and a lot of players were, say, talented, but maybe they weren't in it, like Wolin, or we can get a little more out of maybe Derek Hall with the new coach.
Yeah.
So we looked at that, and so that's where you're sort of torn. Where you're like, okay, it's early, but so maybe Mike doesn't have his guys, but I still think when you look in the offense, we have a talented receiver room, and we have a talented running back room.
Yes.
And we have a good quarterback. Our weak point is the interior offensive line. And obviously, we don't have Abe Lucas, which is a big deal. We have our third string. What I found funny is on the telecast when they were showing the Nick Bosa versus Stone. Did they trying to fool everybody? This is our starting all-pro tackle. It was this guy's lucky he made the team, and then they're just hyping Bosa up. I know he's a great player, but it was sort of a stupid thing, right? It was what do you think's going to happen? I mean, he played okay considering how good Nick Bosa is. I mean, God, right? I mean, they should have been doing more things to get a little more double team action on him, really, than just Stone go one-on-one most of the game. But so I look at that where that's just where you're torn, because this is not a 5-win team. This is a 9-win team back to back. They made the playoffs. They have essentially the same talent offense, and so I agree. It's maybe they're still getting their feet wet. Grubb, you can tell, is figuring it out. It was obvious that Mike Macdonald brought him in the office Monday and said, "You better start running the football on Thursday." And it couldn't have been more obvious. It was run, pass, right off the hop.
Gave
And
me Schottenheimer vibes.
But I mean, I did like the balance. Don't get me wrong. I couldn't believe it was kind of ridiculous that he didn't run the ball. And I understand what he's trying to do. But like you said, these next 3 games, let's just wait and see. But it's really, I think a lot of fans are just kind of waiting to see what happens. You brought up Dan Quinn, and it's they're doing pretty good down there. Not that I like Mike, I do, but I just want to get your last take, and then we'll jump into the Falcons preview here. So I know you said at the top of the show you weren't the biggest fan of the hiring. He's in the building now, and he probably will be here for a while. I know after 6 games it's tough to say, but you said optimistic. Do you believe in Mike and what you've seen, and even preseason and stuff like that? Do you think they made the right decision early on? I know it's hard to predict. You could probably give me a better answer in 2 years, but just as it stands right now, are you a believer a little more, or are you sort of nah, I kind of stand where what I said at the beginning, that I didn't love this hire, and I might still would rather have Quinn?
Yeah. I am a much bigger believer than I was before. I think that I just like Dan Quinn's coaching style. It has nothing to do with that he was here before or anything. It was just, I just really like his coaching style. But for I think what they're trying to do and where they're going, this was a good hire. I do think that. And they wanted Seattle needed something new and fresh. And they, Pete had tried a couple times to get the band back together and it just didn't work and it wasn't right. You know what I mean? And so I could see where people were like, no, we don't want Dan Quinn back because he's already been here. So I get that. I just personally like the way he coaches. But Mike Macdonald is starting to grow on me. And it's not that I didn't like him. I loved his defense in Baltimore. Oh my God, it was such a good defense. And so that part of it I was very happy about. Can't wait to see it at some point.
Yeah.
But I do think that, but I am starting to like him. It's just an adjustment. My absolute favorite coach in the league currently right now is Mike Tomlin. Love Mike Tomlin. He cracks me up because I don't know what it is about it. I just love Mike Tomlin. I love the way he coaches. Yeah. He's found the balance of being a hard ass and being a player's coach. He's found the balance. I think Mike Macdonald will find that balance. I don't think he has it yet. He doesn't have that needed rapport. And I know the players like him. It's been reported the players really like him. They like the no nonsense stuff. Love that. That's what you need to get the respect before you can get the rest of it. Right. So I love that. But I think that he'll find that balance sooner than later. And so I do like the hire and I do see where they're going with it. And I am hopeful. I am hopeful. I think that they will figure it out. It just might take longer than maybe the fans wanted it to.
Dayna, I've got an interesting question for you about the trade they just made, though, Seattle, to acquire another D lineman.
Yeah.
What do you think that's more of a signal of? Do you think that's hey, we need to get somebody else in here that fits more of Mike's profile of what he wants? Or is that more of a Mike Morris, Miles Adams, the depth behind Big Cat, Jaron Reed, and Murphy is not where it needs to be?
Both. Or if there's an injury that's popped up that maybe we don't know is more serious than we think it is. But I do think it has to do with depth more than anything. I think that they realize that when they have all their starters out there, they're not so bad. You lose one and they're screwed, right? So I think that they really want some depth. And for people who are constantly comparing back to the Legion of Boom defense, the best thing they had running for them was the constant rotation they had. They had depth for days. They could roll people in and out of there like nothing, and it didn't change a thing. And I think that is so important. So I really do think that that's some depth. And I know a couple people did some film study today, and I was reading their thoughts on it. And this kid's good, solid player. Is he blue chip? No, but he's a good, solid player that's pretty athletic and probably can be somewhat helpful. And so he's probably grateful to be off a Jags team. And we got him for a 26 sixth rounder. I mean, that's basically a free player. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you're the depth portion and you bring up the Legion of Boom, just that rotation. And I think that's what we need more of. You've seen it with when a couple of guys went down and you're like, ooh, man, we might not be as deep as we might think, and higher hopes on like guys like Mike Morris, and he's still a young guy, right? So, but you're bringing in this veteran that, like Bryce was mentioned too, could be a good locker room guy as well, and always good. Like you talk about the Jaron Reeds, it just kind of helping those young guys along. Like Byron Murphy loves him. Like they sort of like, he sort of like latched onto him at the beginning, and we can't wait for him to get back on the field. That's the other thing. Let's look ahead. You talk about finally getting out of the, and not enough is talked about it, but it's part of it. Like, look, you played 3 football games in 10 days.
11.
11. I mean, that's crazy. The NFL schedule is crazy. And, you mentioned the New England game. And we talked about in our show, not enough gets talked about how these West Coast teams have to fly across country, play like it's their time, when really it's like playing at 10 a.m. Pacific. You got to get ready, so that's not talked about enough. And I feel like we always just get it's not fair, right? It's just not fair. It is what it is. but make those a later game. I don't understand it. I never will. But so they finally get a little time. This coaching staff now gets to like figure out what's happening. You have 10 days. It's a mini bye. It's nice. I almost forgot that NFL football was on yesterday, to be honest. It's because Seattle wasn't playing, right?
Well,
I mean,
you missed a heck of a game between the Commanders and the Ravens.
I did watch football. I'm not, but
Yeah.
just, when I first woke up, I was like, oh, wait a second, it is Sunday, right? So, but let's look ahead. So next Sunday we're in Atlanta playing a Falcons team that, they got some things going on themselves. Kirk Cousins, a veteran there. What do we have to do? What are some of the keys that we have to do to get back on track and get out of there with a win?
I think first and foremost, well, when you look at these two teams, the Falcons team, in my opinion, oh, I'm so sorry. I hope you guys didn't hear that. I apologize.
Oh, no.
So, when you look at this Falcons team, they're somewhat comparable, right? They're ranked relative. I think they're in offense. I think like they're either right above or below Seattle in offense rankings. Defense rankings, they're a little bit above, like 1 or 2 above. And so they're very comparable that way. You look at the numbers with Geno and Kirk Cousins, pretty similar, right? And so you have that sort of thing. But we're in their house. So that's like one little thing about, and I think the most important thing that needs to happen here, obviously with Bijan Robinson, they have to get this run defense figured out. We have to stop that. I think that the secondary, I don't know, is Woolen, did Woolen practice? Is he going to be back? Do we have any idea? I don't even know. I haven't even looked at it, to be honest with you.
I haven't seen anything saying, I know Murphy practiced. I haven't seen anything on Woolen yet.
Okay. Yeah. I saw that Murphy practiced today, which could be huge. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that hopefully that secondary can keep, their receivers under control to a certain extent, but I think it's going to be a pretty comparable game. So what we need to see then is comparable play, right? And so we need to see them pull themselves out of this funk that they have had from losing 3 games in a row, not go in to a very loud stadium and a fan base that is pretty excited that they, might be pulled out of the gutter and see if they can hold their own against this team that is comparable to them. Now, this isn't against the Lions, who were just so much better. They really stepped up to that plate, even though they lost. So can they do the same with a team that they are equals with? I think that they do need to run this ball. I was going to look up the Falcons, what their run stats were, and I did not have time to do that. So I apologize for that. But I think if they can get Kenneth Walker going and really keep that ball moving that way, keep the defense off the field, I think that that's going to be huge. I want to go back to something that you said, though, Ryan, about this Falcons game. There were 3 games in 11 days. That actually is pretty common in the NFL. That is not something that's unheard of. But when you aren't a veteran head coach, you don't necessarily have your timing down. You don't have your expectation. You don't have your practices down. You don't have all of that. The same with flying to the East Coast. Pete Carroll was a master at that, right? Like, we won East Coast games all the time when Pete was up there. That was what he did. Prime time and East Coast games. That was his bread and butter. This new coach doesn't have that timing yet. So now having this 10-day break before having to go to Atlanta to play the Falcons, a comparable team, he hopefully will see the planning and the time that they need to really get in focus to be able to beat this team. But I do think that they need to have much better balance. I think it needs to not be so obvious. We are going to run the ball this time like they did last time. But I do think that needs to be a huge part of their game. And this defense just needs to step up a little bit. So fingers crossed. I don't know. Do you guys have hope for this?
Well, I want you to put you on the spot here, and because we do this every time we have somebody on, and we got to throw out a prediction. So give me a score and who's winning, and then we're gonna throw it over to Bryce, and he's gonna do the same. So who do you got winning, and what's the score?
So this is tough because Atlanta has a tendency to be 2 different teams, right? So just this game on Sunday, they played Carolina. They let Carolina hang around until the 4th quarter, right? And Carolina is not a good team. And they were right there, just 1-score game. And then they kind of took off running. They do that in the 4th quarter. They all have a tendency to take off running. I wish I was more confident in saying this. I usually pick Seattle to win, but I'm going to have Seattle winning by 1 point. It's going to be 23-24. I think it's going to come down to whoever probably has the ball last. And as long as we don't let it get picked off or run back for 20 or for 70 yards, then. But what we've seen from this team is they do have a surge at the end.
Yeah.
So does Atlanta. So we just
Right.
have to fight that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I mean, that's the one thing that no one's going to say this team doesn't fight. I mean, that's the one thing.
Agreed.
As much as they have been struggling in a lot of different areas, they have had chances those last 2 games to actually win at the end, and
Yeah,
obviously
absolutely.
making mistakes and whatever, the run defense, whatever. But yeah, so I like that. So you got Seattle winning 24-23.
Yes.
Okay, I like that. Bryce, what do you got?
So it's actually really funny because I'm just looking at PFF, and as much as people have their differing opinions, Atlanta and Seattle are very almost identical in a lot of stats. Like Atlanta's overall offense is ranked at an 81, Seattle's a 79. The run offense, 88, Seattle's ranked 90. I don't know how that exactly works, but it does. Their pass offense is basically off by a point of a decimal.
They're so similar.
And defensively, they're similar again. Like the defensive grades, 65 for Atlanta, 68 for Seattle. Their run defense are both 59 and 61, and coverage is 76, 71. So it makes it hard. I think for Seattle, the biggest thing that's going to help them in this game is time of possession. That's what they need to do. They need to control the game and the flow of the game and minimize the ability for Atlanta to get in a rhythm. And the best way to do that is keep your offense on the field and control the clock and grind the clock out. I think Seattle is going to come back with Murphy coming back with the addition of, I want to say it's Robertson Harris into that rotation. I think that's going to make a difference because you're going to be able to spill some guys like Leonard Williams potentially and Jaron Reed. I'm going to say 23 Seattle, and I'm going to say 14 Atlanta.
Oh,
wow. Okay, so you got the defense stepping up.
okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I agree with that. I think Murphy, if he's back, that's huge. And then the guy we got from Jacksonville, just to get another body in that rotation.
I don't know that he'll play. Do you think he'll play? He's flying from London tomorrow.
I think he's going to play. I mean, tomorrow. Yeah. I think he should be playing. I mean, but we'll see. I mean, okay. I mean, that's not going to be the determining factor for me. But if we have another body there, that's nice.
That would be
and
nice.
I agree. We definitely got to. I think running the ball it was what they want to do, right? So, and Ken is arguably your best offensive player. So you get him rolling, get the time of possession. I think this 10 days is going to be huge. I really do. I think they needed it. Everybody needed a break. I think you had to reset. And I think Geno's good enough to say he's the veteran to say, look, let's get back on track. Let's forget all this stuff. The headset, like, let's get back on track here. Have a good week of practice and get things going. And I think they're gonna do some things in the passing game here. I'm expecting 31 points from the Hawks. I think I'm throwing 31 out there, man.
Oh, that would make me so happy.
Hey, well, get ready for it. So I got 31. Hey, listen, I finally picked the Seahawks to lose last Thursday, right? So the first 4 I was going Hawks, and I was right for the first 3 of them. And I picked them. That's right? What game did I not pick them to win? I can't remember. We talked about Jackson.
You didn't pick him to win Detroit.
That's right. I'm sorry.
I didn't either.
I had Hawks winning that game actually. I did, and we had Jackson. I said that they're going in and they're going to win. But anyways, I finally said that they're not going to win last week, and so I sort of coming down to earth a little bit. But I do have them put on 31. So I got 31-24 Seattle. So I think that Bryce has got 14, so he's got the defense rolling. So I think the defense is going to be a little better, but I just think the Atlanta is physical. They got some physical players. I still think you're going to see some explosive plays, but I just think that we're also going to have ours. And I got them 31-24 back on track, Hawks.
I just think from my perspective, I think it might be easier to fix some of the defensive issues a little bit sooner than getting that offensive line figured out. And that defensive line in Atlanta isn't something to write home about, but they do
Right.
have good players on the interior. And that's where, for me, it's like, unless we can establish the run, and that's why I only say 23 for Seattle, I think there's a higher chance Seattle's defense is able to do some more things to maybe spark an extra possession here or there for Seattle to give them the edge.
Yeah,
And-
go ahead, Dayna.
I was just going to say, Atlanta's not a barn burner, right? Like, honestly, the Atlanta-Carolina game was boring to watch. So it's not like they're a barn burner all the time. And so it would make sense if the defense steps up that they can kind of curb that even just a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I just look back to when, we were raving about just a couple of weeks ago when they played Detroit. I mean, you talk about that offense, like, man, we got some firepower going. So I think it can go both ways. I don't think there's as much to fix as you think. I get the old line, but if we were talking about how Grubb can adapt just a couple of weeks ago, if he can adapt where he balances it, but just gets a little more creative in how he's doing it, then I think Geno, like, they do have firepower. Like, look, that DK TD that was called back was because Ken just didn't get set out there. Like, little things like that, if they clean up, that was a beautiful ball. That was a TD wiped when they would have had over 4 minutes left. So I think that things can get cleaned up. But we'll see it. But at the end of the day, we all got the Hawks winning. So that's a big thing right there. So Dayna, we appreciate you as always coming on the show. Why don't you tell everybody watching our show before we let you go here what you have going on and what you got coming up next on your podcast and where people can find all your work.
So, of course, I have been with the Our Turf Football Podcast now. This is, I think, our 12th season we've been doing this, and we cover all 32 NFL teams. So we do cover a little bit of everything on there. And Our Turf, that's every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. over on YouTube, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then we also just this season started the Our Turf Football Podcast College Edition. And I am not part of that, but we're very proud of it. These girls dive into college ball and they love it. And so it's really been fun and it's been very popular. So we're really excited about that. And then, of course, you can find me every once in a while. I pop up over there at Real Hawk Talk with those Hawk Blogger boys. And then you can always find me on Twitter. It's at Dayna OG.
Awesome stuff, guys. Go over to Dayna's channel. Go check it out. Awesome stuff over there. Dayna, we appreciate it again. Awesome conversation. And we would love to have you on again in the future and talk Hawks. And yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Dayna.
Thanks, Dayna. Bye-bye.
Guys, that was Dayna O'Gorman on the show again, man. I think this is like 3 or 4 time we've had her on. Like, it's just always a good convo. It's one of those times when you have somebody on and the conversation just flows. You got sort of what we want to talk about, but we just start getting into just football talk. And, she brings up some great points. We talked about, that balance with Mike. And it's interesting. The biggest takeaway for me was when, she at the beginning of the show said, look, Mike wasn't I wasn't pumped. Wasn't pumped. Dan, I like the way Dan coaches. But then, when it's like, well, what do you think now? Even though this team is struggling, she's like, I'm a bigger believer in Mike. And that sort of shows you that, like, even somebody that wasn't like jumping through the roof of the hire now, even early on when the team's struggling, could say, look, with all the things I'm seeing with Mike as the head coach, I'm a believer. And I think down the road as this team progresses, you're going to see some good things from him.
No, totally. And it was a really good conversation to have because we were able to dive into a little bit of how much is the prior roster construction to blame for this and how much of that is, like she said, and I totally agree with her, that if things really derail and things don't get right in the next year or two, you really look at John Schneider and his seat does get hot and it does get warm. There's a lot of people that think John Schneider's immune and John Schneider's this messiah of a GM. And I think John Schneider's done a fantastic job in Seattle. He's been one of the most consistently good GMs. And that's the key term there. Good. Not great, good. And that's where, for me, the offensive line deficiencies and all these other areas where we've neglected certain position groups and missed, that is an indictment on his legacy in Seattle if it doesn't get fixed and it doesn't get corrected going forward. So overall, no, man, it was a great conversation. Really looking forward to having Dayna back in the future. So it'll be good.
Yeah, it will be good. And just real quick, my last point, touch on, John, what you just said. is he might be forced to fix those problems. Like you said, well, I said this a while ago. Well, listen, we got to fix this, and it could come up from higher aboves that it's like, you have so much of a leash here, you're not immune. And you talk about guys adapting. He might have to do some of his own adapting as far as what he does philosophy wise, and bringing in some different players, because it's just too big of a focus now. This O line, it's just way too big of a focus, and I think people are getting tired of it. So it's definitely got to change, especially for what you want to try to do. So that'll be interesting as we move forward as well with Mike and his staff. How is John moving forward at the same time? It's going to be interesting, man. The season, like we said, it's still, as much as struggling, we knew we're going to have some up and downs. But again, it's football is a week-to-week league, and we're looking ahead to the Falcons game. We're pumped. We're still behind this team, and that's all you can ask for, man. So yeah, awesome combo today, guys. Go down, subscribe to and subscribe to Dayna's channel, man, because like she's really got some good stuff, and we love having her on the show. So yeah, and we're definitely gonna have her back. So
For sure.
That's it for us tonight. And get ready. We got some cool stuff coming up. Bryce, any final words?
From me, guys, check out our shop too, www.hawkzonerundown.com. We've got a bunch of cool stuff up there, hats, hoodies, a couple different other things that'll be coming down the pipe. And we also will have another episode later this week with Seahawkers Canada Booster Club group coming on the show. Their president and vice president are going to come on and talk Seahawks with us.
Yeah, look out for that. Awesome stuff. So anyways, guys, that's it for us tonight. Dayna O'Gorman, once again, Hawks Zone Rundown. We'll get you guys on the next one. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.